Emma, a young woman struggling to care for her little sister, stumbles upon a frail old man in the rain and saves his life. What she doesn't realize is that this simple act of kindness will unravel secrets from her past. As they join forces to revive a struggling community shelter, Emma faces the ultimate test of trust and sacrifice. But who was that old man really, and why did he want her help to save the shelter? The rain poured down with a relentless fury, drenching every inch of the narrow street as Emma pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders. She had one purpose tonight: to make it home to her little sister, Lily, with the money from her double shift safely tucked in her pocket. But this bitter storm clawed through her coat, and all she could think about was how her sister, only 6 years old, would be huddled under a single blanket waiting for her. As Emma pushed through the biting wind, her eye caught something, a figure lying still near a darkened storefront. It was an elderly man, shivering on the wet pavement, his hand twitching as though trying to hold on to something invisible. People hurried by, averting their gaze as though he didn't exist, as though he were just part of the rainy cityscape. But Emma stopped. She couldn't just walk away. "Sir?" she called, crouching beside him. His eyes fluttered open, gray and clouded, meeting hers with a look of desperation. She could feel the faint rise and fall of his chest, barely strong enough to push against the damp night air. Her heart pounded with urgency. Gripping her phone, she dialed for help, her voice rising over the rain. "Please, it's an emergency. There's an old man lying here. He's not doing well." Minutes later, an ambulance's wail sliced through the street. The paramedics worked quickly, lifting the old man onto a stretcher, his frail body barely visible under the thick blankets they wrapped around him. As they loaded him into the ambulance, he grabbed Emma's hand with surprising strength, his grip sending a jolt through her. You didn't just leave me," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Thank you." Without letting go, he looked at her with something deeper than gratitude, a mixture of wonder and sadness, like he knew something about her, something she didn't yet know. Emma followed him to the hospital, sitting anxiously in the waiting room, her heart thudding as she replayed his words. She felt a strange connection to him, as if fate had pulled her to that exact corner of the street. When she finally went to leave, exhausted and anxious, she heard her name called by a nurse. Mr. Thompson asked for you." "Who?" Emma asked, startled. She didn't know his name. The nurse pointed down the hallway where Mr. Thompson, now resting under warm hospital lights, gazed at her with a soft smile. His voice was weak but clear as he thanked her once more, and they began to talk. He seemed genuinely curious about her life, asking about her family, her work, her sister. And as the minutes turned into an hour, Emma found herself sharing her story with him, her struggles, her dreams for Lily, her fear that she might not be able to make things better. Mr. Thompson's gaze turned pensive, almost haunted, and he reached out, placing his hand on hers. "Emma," he said, "I have a proposition for you, if you'll trust me." The next morning, Emma found herself standing before an iron gate, taller and grander than anything she'd ever seen. It was the address, scribbled on a slip of paper as she left his hospital room. She'd hesitated, almost crumpling it in her hand. But something in his eyes had compelled her to hold on, to see where this strange path might lead. The gate creaked open, and Emma stepped forward, awed by the sheer size of the estate that lay beyond. Neatly trimmed hedges lined a cobblestone pathway leading to a sprawling mansion, its walls covered with ivy that seemed to breathe with the morning mist. She felt a chill, a reminder of how different this world was from her cramped apartment. She was greeted by an elderly butler who introduced himself as James, bowing slightly as he welcomed her. "Mr. Thompson is expecting you, Miss Emma," he said, guiding her through the opulent hallways filled with portraits, chandeliers, and the faint scent of polished wood. She barely recognized herself in the mirrors they passed, her damp hair from the rain still framing her face, her plain clothes in stark contrast to the grandeur around her. Finally, they arrived in a sunlit sitting room where Mr. Thompson, looking far stronger than the frail man she'd found on the street, was waiting. He rose when he saw her, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Emma," he greeted her, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "I'm glad you came." Emma felt her nerves rise, but she managed a polite smile, her curiosity pressing her forward. Honestly, I didn't expect to see all this," she admitted, her eyes sweeping over the luxurious surroundings. Mr. Thompson nodded, his face turning serious. "I can only imagine. But Emma, there's something I need to tell you, a truth I haven't shared with anyone in years." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Years ago, my daughter ran away from home. She was young and stubborn, as was I, and we disagreed over her choice to marry someone I didn't approve of. She cut all ties, and I was too proud to mend them." Emma listened, her heart pounding as his words seemed to pull at something deep within her. She felt an odd sense of familiarity in his story, like she'd heard it before. "She had a child," he went on, his gaze steady on hers. "A daughter. I never knew about her until you saved me that night." Emma's breath caught, her mind racing as she struggled to process his word. A daughter? She looked at him, waiting for him to explain, to make sense of the thoughts swirling in her head. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, I believe that child is you." The room went silent, save for the faint ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner. Emma could hardly breathe. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I've done my research," he continued. "After you left the hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling that you were more than just a kind stranger. I had my people look into your background, your mother's name, your birth records. Everything matches. You are my granddaughter, Emma, my only living family." The words felt surreal, like they were floating in a dream. Emma had always wondered about her family, always longed for some connection to the past she knew so little about. And now, here it was, an answer she'd never expected, delivered by a man who'd been a stranger just days before. But with the revelation came a flood of confusion and questions. Why hadn't he searched for her sooner? Why was he only reaching out now? Emma's voice trembled. "Why now? Why didn't you look for me before?" Mr. Thompson's face fell, his eyes clouding with regret. "I was a fool, Emma, a proud, foolish man. When your mother left, I thought she'd betrayed me, and I convinced myself she didn't want anything to do with our family. It was only after you saved me that I realized the mistake I'd made. I'm asking for a chance to make things right, Emma. I want to be the family you've never had, if you'll allow it." A part of her wanted to embrace this unexpected family connection, to finally feel like she belonged somewhere. But another part held back, cautious and uncertain. She'd spent her whole life relying on herself. How could she trust a man who'd abandoned her mother? She swallowed, her voice quiet but firm. "Mr. Thompson, I don't know if I can just accept this. I have a sister. Lily depends on me, and I can't just uproot our lives because of something you decided now." His expression softened, and he nodded slowly. "I understand, Emma, and I respect your loyalty to your sister, but perhaps there's another way. I don't want you to give up anything. In fact, I want to help you, to help both of you." Emma felt a spark of hope, though she fought to keep it hidden. "What do you mean?" "I have a place," Mr. Thompson explained, his tone thoughtful. "It's an old community shelter that my late wife and I funded. It's fallen into disrepair over the years, but if you're willing, I'd like you to take it over, bring it back to life. It could be a way to start fresh, to make a difference, and perhaps to find a place for yourself and Lily." Emma's mind raced. The shelter? She could hardly imagine herself running anything, much less a shelter, but the idea held a strange allure. A place where she could help others, a place where she could build something of her own, maybe even create a home for her sister. Mr. Thompson watched her closely, as if sensing her hesitation. "This isn't a test, Emma," he said softly. "It's a chance for both of us, and if you say no, I'll understand." For a long moment, Emma stayed silent, weighing his words, the possibilities, and the risks. She'd always wanted to build a better life for Lily, to give her a future brighter than her own past. But could she trust Mr. Thompson, the man who had been absent all her life, to be part of that future? At last, she met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a newfound determination. "All right, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice steady. "I'll do it, but for Lily's sake, not for yours." A glimmer of relief crossed his face, and he nodded with respect. Thank you, Emma. And don't worry, I'll make sure you have everything you need. In the following weeks, Emma found herself swept into a world she had never known. The shelter was a sturdy but neglected building on the edge of the city, with cracked walls and dim lighting that spoke of years of abandonment. Yet as she stood before it on that first morning, a strange sense of purpose surged through her, something she had never felt so strongly. This was more than a job or a task. It was a chance to carve out something of her own, a place where people like her, lost, struggling, alone, could find refuge. Emma worked tirelessly, juggling the needs of the shelter with her responsibilities at home, where Lily was still adjusting to the change. Though they'd moved into a small house closer to the shelter, Emma felt the strain of balancing her roles as sister, guardian, and now, leader of this struggling facility. But as the days passed, she poured her heart into the place, repainting walls, fixing leaks, even setting up small rooms where those in need could sleep and have a warm meal. Soon, word spread through the neighborhood, and people began to come, mothers with children, elderly men with nowhere to go, and young people seeking shelter from the cold. Emma's efforts turned the shelter into a small but vibrant community, a place where stories of hardship were met with compassion and understanding. For the first time in her life, she felt that she belonged somewhere, that her own hardships had prepared her to guide others through their own. Then one day, as Emma was helping to distribute blankets in the main hall, a figure entered the shelter, moving slowly with an air of authority. It was Mr. Thompson, impeccably dressed as always, yet there was a softness to his gaze that hadn't been there before. He watched her quietly, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. After the hall cleared, he approached her, his voice softer than usual. "Emma," he said, "I see what you're doing here. You've transformed this place in ways I couldn't have imagined." She gave him a small, uncertain smile, still finding it strange to think of him as her family. "I'm just trying to make it a real home," she replied, her tone reserved but sincere. He nodded, his face turning serious. "Emma, there's something I haven't told you, something I think you're ready to hear." Her stomach tightened. She had sensed there was more to his story, but part of her hadn't wanted to know. She looked at him warily, waiting for him to continue. "My wife, your grandmother, was the one who created this shelter," he began, his voice tinged with regret. "She was always reaching out to people in need, always giving more than she had. When she passed, I let her vision fade, too consumed by my own grief to continue her work. But seeing you here, Emma, it's like she's alive again. It's like you're carrying on something she left unfinished." Emma felt a strange mix of emotions, a sense of pride tempered by the old resentment she hadn't let go. "Why are you telling me this now?" He hesitated, searching her face. "Because I need you to know that I'm not a good man, Emma. I pushed away the only people who mattered to me, your mother included. I didn't think I'd ever get a second chance to make things right, until you came along." She looked down, wrestling with the hurt she still felt. "It's not that easy, Mr. Thompson. You can't just show up and make things better with a few words." A flicker of sadness crossed his face, but he nodded, accepting her words. "I know, and I don't expect forgiveness, Emma, but there's something else you should know." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "The shelter, this place you've poured yourself into, it's in debt, serious debt. I tried to cover the expenses, but it's more than I can manage alone. I was hoping that you'd help me find a way to save it." Emma's heart plummeted. She thought she'd finally found stability, a home, a purpose. But the foundation of that purpose was now slipping away. "How much debt?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his gaze steady but solemn. "More than $100,000. The weight of his words crashed over her, threatening to suffocate her. She looked around the room, seeing not just the walls and furniture, but the people, the mothers, the children, the elderly, who had come to rely on this place. They had nowhere else to go, and now she was facing the possibility of losing everything she had built. Emma took a shaky breath, steadying herself. "There must be a way. We can hold a fundraiser, ask for donations, do something." Mr. Thompson's face softened, a trace of admiration in his eyes. "Emma, I'll support you however I can, but you have to understand, it might not be enough. The debt collectors are impatient. If we don't make a substantial payment soon, they could seize the property. A chill ran through her, but she forced herself to stay calm. Then we have no time to lose. We'll start by reaching out to the community, asking for help, and I'll find more ways to cut costs. I'm not giving up on this place. Over the next few weeks, Emma worked harder than ever, reaching out to local businesses, organizing bake sales, and rallying volunteers to raise money for the shelter. She pushed herself to exhaustion, staying up late to keep the accounts in order, all while trying to keep Lily's life stable. The community responded with a surprising outpouring of support, small donations, food, supplies, all bringing hope in small doses. Then, on a particularly cold morning, a letter arrived for Emma at the shelter. She tore it open, her hands shaking as she read the words, "Foreclosure notice." The final deadline was in 3 days. If they couldn't pay the debt by then, the shelter would be closed, and everyone who'd found a home there would be back on the streets. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat, her vision blurring. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, was on the brink of slipping away. Desperate, she went to Mr. Thompson, her voice breaking as she explained the situation. He listened, his face drawn and solemn. "Emma, there's something I can do. I've been reluctant, but I can sell my home. It would cover the debt, but I'd have to give up everything." Emma looked at him, stunned by the offer. "Your home? But that's everything you have left." He nodded, a sad smile on his face. "Yes, but it's nothing compared to what I've already lost. I don't want to lose you too, Emma." A surge of emotion filled her, the walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crumble. She hadn't wanted to believe he truly cared, but here he was, offering to give up his own life's work for her, for the shelter. It was a sacrifice she hadn't expected, one that went beyond words. They agreed to go through with it, and within days, the shelter's debt was paid in full. The foreclosure notice rescinded. Mr. Thompson's home was sold, and he moved into a small apartment near the shelter, his life a shadow of what it once was. But Emma knew that for him, it was a choice made not out of desperation, but out of love. A love he had spent years hiding, and only now had the courage to show. The shelter remained open, a haven for those in need, its walls a testament to Emma's resilience and Mr. Thompson's quiet redemption. As they stood together in the shelter's courtyard one evening, watching the sunset cast a warm glow over the building, Emma felt a strange peace. She knew her life was far from perfect, that the road ahead would still be rough, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone. She had found a family, not in wealth or luxury, but in shared sacrifice and the promise of a new beginning. And as she looked at Mr. Thompson, she knew they'd saved each other in ways neither could have ever imagined. In the days that followed, the shelter flourished under Emma's care, and the once crumbling building transformed into a beacon of hope for the community. Every room now felt alive, filled with laughter, quiet conversations, and the gentle hum of life being rebuilt. Children played in the courtyard. Mothers cooked together in the kitchen, and elderly residents shared stories with anyone willing to listen. The shelter wasn't just a safe place anymore. It was a home. For Emma, every day brought new challenges, yet each hurdle seemed to strengthen her bond with Mr. Thompson. She had begun to see him not only as her grandfather, but as a friend, a man who had changed as much as she had. The cold, distant figure she'd met in the hospital had softened, revealing a gentle warmth and kindness that she couldn't have imagined. One evening, as Emma was reviewing the shelter's budget in the office, Mr. Thompson entered, carrying a simple bouquet of wildflowers. He smiled sheepishly, setting them on the desk. "I thought the place could use a little color," he said, his eyes twinkling. Emma laughed, surprised. "You're right, it's perfect." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the last rays of sunlight filter through the window. After a moment, Mr. Thompson turned to her, his expression serious. "Emma, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You've accomplished something I never could. You saved this shelter, and in doing so, you saved me." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat, the weight of his words sinking in. She hadn't realized how much his approval meant to her until this moment. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you." He reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. "I only wish I could have done more, been there sooner." But Emma shook her head. "We're here now, and that's all that matters." The days stretched into weeks, and life settled into a steady rhythm. Mr. Thompson became a regular figure at the shelter, mentoring some of the young people, helping the elderly, and even organizing small events to keep spirits high. His apartment, though modest, was filled with memories of his past life, photos of his late wife, reminders of his daughter, and now pictures of Emma and Lily, a new family taking root amidst the remnants of the old. One evening, as Emma walked Lily home from a nearby park, the little girl looked up at her sister with wide, curious eyes. "Emma, do you think Grandpa will stay with us forever?" Emma's heart swelled at the question. She smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from Lily's face. "I hope so, Lily, I really do." They arrived home to find Mr. Thompson waiting for them, a gentle smile on his face as he welcomed them in. He'd prepared a simple dinner, and they sat together, eating and sharing stories from their day. It was a humble meal, but to Emma, it felt like a feast, rich with the warmth of family, something she had never truly known. As the night grew late, Mr. Thompson pulled out a worn notebook and placed it on the table, his gaze steady. "Emma," he began, "there's one last thing I'd like to ask of you." Emma looked at him curiously, noting the solemnity in his eyes. "This shelter, it was your grandmother's dream. She wanted a place where no one would feel alone, where everyone would have a chance. I want to make it official. I want you to inherit it, to make it truly yours. It would mean the world to me if you'd continue her legacy." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She knew the weight of his request, the enormity of what he was offering. This place had become her life's work, but to have it officially, to be trusted with its future, that was a gift beyond word. I don't know what to say," she stammered, overwhelmed. "Say yes," he replied softly, his gaze unwavering, "because there's no one else who could carry this on the way you have." Emma nodded, her heart brimming with gratitude and pride. "Yes," she whispered, barely able to hold back her tears. "I'd be honored." They hugged, a quiet understanding passing between them. This was more than a simple inheritance. It was a passing of love, of legacy, of redemption. Mr. Thompson had found peace, and Emma had found her purpose. Together, they had built something stronger than walls, something that would live on in the lives they had touched. From that day forward, the shelter flourished under Emma's guidance, growing into a haven that extended far beyond the city. People came from miles away, drawn to the warmth, the kindness, and the strength that seemed to radiate from the walls. And every time someone new walked through the doors, Emma would welcome them with open arms, just as she had been welcomed. In the years to come, she would often find herself sitting with Mr. Thompson in the shelter's courtyard, watching the sun set over the building they had fought so hard to save. She would watch as children played, as families reunited, as laughter filled the air, and each time she would feel a quiet, unwavering joy, knowing that she had found, at last, a place to call home. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and love, please don't forget to subscribe to HeroKind Stories for more incredible tales. Every like, comment, and subscribe helps us bring you inspiring stories that touch the heart. And if you're ready for more, click the video on your screen now. Don't miss it.